My name is Angela Murjani, and I'm sure that by the end of this lesson you are going to know a lot more about this poem and the poet who has written it, whose name is Dylan Thomas. Now, this particular poem is one of Dylan Thomas's most popular poems, and this is because he has dealt with the universal themes of grief and death in this poem. He also talks about the deep pain and sorrow that one feels when one is experiencing the imminent death of a loved one. Confronting the reality of that impending death is not easy, and this is one of the main reasons that this poem has been so popular with people through the years, because the emotion is not new. The emotion is not alien. People all over the world of whatever age, whatever economic strata, whatever social level will at some point in their lives experience death. And so when Dylan Thomas talks about this death that's going to happen to his father, we can relate so well to him at every level of his emotional turmoil. During the course of this poem, he talks about many other kinds of men, different from his father: wise men, good men, grave men, men who have made an impact upon this earth through the things that they did, men who have been acknowledged by society. But in spite of the impact that they made, and in spite of their own personal struggles with death, there came a time when they had to succumb to this same death. It kind of shows us that the rules of this universe, the laws that govern this universe, are unrelenting, and they apply to everybody, and everybody must go through them. It shows us how small and how insignificant human beings are when compared to the expansiveness and the extent of this whole universe and the laws that govern it. Ultimately, the poet makes an urgent appeal to his father. Through this poem, he's trying to tell his father not to give in to death, not to succumb to it, but to fight against it and to battle it with every last fiber of his being, every last iota of strength that he has. But in a sense, this is a paradox, because while urging his father to fight death, he also talks about how all the other men who did fight death had to give in at some stage or the other. Here in this poem, Dylan Thomas is comparing the span of a life to the length of a day. And then, as a corollary to that, he compares death to the coming of night. So when he urges his father strongly at the end of this poem, rage against the coming of the night, what he's trying to say is, Father, with everything that you have, try to keep death off. Try to stave death away for some more time. Dylan Thomas, the son of a professor of English, was born in 1914 in Wales. He grew up hearing his father recite Shakespeare to him, and from there was born a passion for the rhythms of English poetry. He dropped out of school at the age of 16 to become a junior reporter for the South Wales Daily Post. By December of 1932, he left his job at the Post and decided to concentrate on his poetry full time. It was during this time, in his late teens, that Thomas wrote more than half of his collected poems. Dylan Thomas wrote prolifically from a very young age. In fact, his first poems were published in his school magazine. So if you've been writing for your school magazine or your college journal, there is hope for you. One day you might be a famous poet just like Dylan Thomas. In 1934, when Thomas was 20, he moved to London. Here, he won the Poets' Corner Book Prize and published his first book, which was called 18 Poems, and this was published to great acclaim. The book drew from a collection of poetry notebooks that Thomas had written years earlier, as would many of his most popular poems and books that were published later. Sadly, though, it was during this period of his greatest success that Thomas also began the habit of alcohol abuse. While his contemporaries, T.S. Eliot and W.H. Auden, were writing around the same time on social and intellectual themes, Dylan Thomas wrote in the Romantic tradition. He wrote poems that were highly charged with his intense emotionalism. Thomas himself admitted to this emotive component of his poems, stating that he let an image be made emotionally in himself, then he applied to it his intellect, and only after it had first been formed by feeling it. So, an image for Dylan Thomas was birthed in his emotional being, then it was transferred to his intellect, where he applied to it the poetic craft, and the outcome was a marvelous poem. Some critics have commented that his poems are a product of his emotionality, and we will see while we study this poem today how true that statement is. Thomas often visited America on poetry reading tours, where he was extremely popular. You can hear him read one of his poems on YouTube, even this one, by clicking on the link that has been mentioned after the lesson. Thomas Dylan's flamboyant personality, his singing Welsh accent, his heavy drinking, and the tremendous depth of feeling with which he read earned him the reputation of being the archetypal romantic poet. Sadly, it was in America that Dylan Thomas collapsed in a tavern after a long bout of drinking at the very early age of 39. Now let's take a closer look at the poem, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Night. Structurally, this poem is called a villanelle. A villanelle is a structure of poetry that is borrowed from the French. Typically, a villanelle is a poem which has 19 lines. It has a very limited rhyming scheme with only 2 rhymes in it, and it also has a musical quality. A villanelle can include a repeated refrain, and this poem has 2. That is, the repetition of an idea or a saying again and again through the poem. The 2 refrains in this poem are, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. This poem has no title, but the first refrain, do not go gentle, is used as a title for the poem. Do Not Go Gentle Into That Night by Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. When one has read the poem, one can understand immediately why this poem of Thomas's is so popular. It deals with the theme of grief at the death of a loved one, and this is something that everybody can identify with. Perhaps today you don't want to think about death. Maybe you're not in a mood to look at something which is so serious. Maybe it's too close to you right now for comfort, but I would advise you to have a look at the way that Dylan Thomas analyzes death and see if you can gain some insights into death from his explanation. The second reason that this poem is so popular is because it also has the theme of encouragement. And I believe that every individual loves to be encouraged, either directly or through the encouragement which somebody else receives. Now, in this poem, Dylan Thomas is encouraging his father not to slip silently into death. He does not wish to see his father succumb to the onslaught of death, but his father, who was once an officer in the army, must have been a person of great vigor and vitality. So now, when Dylan Thomas perceives him old and frail and slipping away out of life, he urges him, reminding him of the past and telling him that it's possible. Try and fight against death and do not allow death to overcome you. Now, for me personally, this poem really touched a string in my own heart because my own father was a colonel in the army, and I had watched him as a young girl, my heart swelling with pride as he took the salute on a Republic Day parade, and he was full of that same vigor and strength which Dylan Thomas talks about that he had once seen in his father. And then it was heartbreaking when I had to see this same person that I had known and loved, and I knew him even now and I loved, but now he was weak, frail, dependent, keeping very poor health, and there was this dilemma inside of my heart and inside of my mind. Was it good to hold on to him? Was it good to have him at any cost, at all costs, even to see that prime of his life gone now, even to see that independence drawn away, to see his strength slowly ebbing away? Or would it be just better to remember him the way that he was when he was young and strong and commanding in his posture and in his personality? Now, this is the same thing that Dylan Thomas is talking about today, and he investigates what actually happens to us emotionally when we are confronted with the death of a close loved one in our families. I also mentioned that he talked about other kinds of men, wise men, grave men, other men who had made an impact on society and who had tried to fight death through their particular specialty in life. But then again, it seems paradoxical that Dylan Thomas says in this poem that death overtook them, death overwhelmed them. So what then is the message of this poem? On the one hand, it seems that Thomas is trying to encourage his father to battle with death and to fight it, to keep it off, to stave it away. And on the other hand, he's saying, even though other people have done the same and they have fought death, they have died. What then is the message? There are two explanations. One group of thinkers feels that the way Thomas is examining it is that death, although it happens to everybody, regardless of their station of life, brings out the fact that life is precious. When you consider people and their different qualities of life, you will find people through the whole spectrum. There are some people who have a really bad quality of life. There are some whose quality of life is poor, some whose quality of life is average, and some who have a really great quality of life. But regardless of this quality of life, life remains precious. A case in point are those families that have somebody who's in a coma on life support. Even though doctors tell them that this person is practically dead, if you remove the life support, if you give us the permission to do it, they will be dead. Still, families don't want to let go of their loved ones. They want to hold on even unto the last minute. And that's because of the value which attaches to life. So even though their loved one has a quality of life which is really poor, even so, they want them alive because life means so much more than death. There are other instances where people who go through some experience in life suddenly realize how precious life is. For example, I know a friend who used to be obese. He was a foodie. He loved food and he ate to his heart's content, which made him become really fat. But then there came a day when he was blessed with a little baby girl. The moment his eyes set on that little baby, his whole perspective of life changed. He thought, now I cannot afford to neglect my health any longer. Life is precious. If I continue to be obese, I am posing many serious threats to my life. And so he took charge of his health and he made it a point to stop that self-destructive behavior of overeating, because he wanted to live, to be there, to see his little girl grow up. So, there are instances in life which bring home how valuable this life is that God has given to us. And so one view is that life is precious, and that's why people want to hold on to it even until the last possible moment. There is another school of thinkers, and these believe that the struggle that people go through at the end of their life is not for their own benefit, but it's rather for the benefit of their loved ones whom they are leaving behind. This school of thought feel that the struggle that their loved one goes through helps to bring closure and comfort to the ones who are left behind. How does this work? It works in this way. It gives the people who are left behind a feeling that the one that is departing loves them so much that they don't want to leave. So they are putting up this battle, they are going through this struggle, they are making this effort to hold on to life so that they can spend a few more moments with their loved one. And so it's very pleasing to the loved ones who are left behind, because looking back they can say, oh, they wanted to be with us even till the last minute. They extended their lives by 1 week or 1 month or whatever because they loved us so much. So these are the two views, that we experience the struggle with death either because life is precious or because it's good for the people who are left behind. It gives them comfort from knowing that the one who died didn't just give up and die, but he battled death because he loved his people so much that he wanted to stay on a bit longer. It has been historically stated that Dylan Thomas never actually showed this poem to his father. So it seems like he wrote this poem more for his own benefit than for his father's. And in view of what Dylan Thomas said himself about his own emotionality, it would seem a likely explanation that in dealing with this emotional turbulence within his heart, it was apt for him to transfer that emotionality into a poem and to put it down in words and on paper. Dylan Thomas now takes up 4 different kinds of men: wise men, wild men, good men, and grave men. All these men have left a mark upon society. They have been acclaimed for being excellent in their own field of expertise. And Thomas tells us that each one of them, in their own way, did put up a real struggle against death. Ironically, the poem also tells us that these men died. Yet, in spite of giving us these examples from the lives of these 4 kinds of men, we find Thomas pleading, urging his father to rage against the coming of the night, which we have understood to be death. So the poem seems to suggest that even though Dylan Thomas is asking his father to rage against death, his raging will ultimately be ineffectual in the relentless face of death. Speaking of the wise, Dylan Thomas says that all wise men have been bestowed with a measure of wisdom. They have used this wisdom to throw their light upon certain dark issues that confront average normal people in the world. There are many things which average people don't understand. But when the wisdom of the wise is applied to those situations, there is clarity, there is light, and then ordinary people are able to understand complex things because of the wisdom which is granted to just a small group of people. In speaking of such people, Dylan Thomas says that even though wise men have lent their wisdom and brought some amount of light to this world, still, when you compare their wisdom to one bolt of lightning, which is part of this universe, it is insignificant. It means nothing at all. When you consider the brightness which covers this earth with one flash of lightning which just takes a couple of seconds, then the wisdom of wise men is absolutely inconsequential. Hence, even though wise men know through their wisdom that one day they must die, one day they have to give up to death, one day there will be a call and they have to succumb to this power of death, still they fight it. But that is because their wisdom is nothing compared to the wisdom of this universe. Next, Thomas talks about good men. Good men are few and far between in this world. When we look at life's experiences, it seems like there are more evil people, there are more wicked people, there are more who will wish us harm and ill than those who would wish us good. Yet, Thomas says that there are good men who do good deeds for many people in this world. However, once more, these good men's deeds are very frail or delicate or insignificant compared to the vastness of this earth. Dylan Thomas calls this earth the green bay. When we look at the earth as a green planet, green stands for bounty. Green stands for the plenteous bounty of this earth. When we think of the goodness which has come from the earth to everybody, regardless of who they are, regardless of how good or bad they are, the earth provides sunshine, the earth provides rain, the earth provides food, the earth gives us the resources to have our shelter too. The earth is so plentifully bounteous towards us. So when you compare the good deeds of a good man to the bounty which earth has given us, again, it just diminishes into a nothingness. So even though good men have lived in this earth, good men have tried to do their measure of good deeds to other people, yet when you look at it against the vastness and the immenseness of this universe, their good deeds are really very tiny and insignificant. The third group of men that Dylan Thomas takes up are the wild sort, the free-spirited type of people. Those, he says, who felt that they could take on the sun, they could take on nature, that there was nothing that they couldn't do. And Dylan Thomas says, nature looks upon them and laughs because she says, how foolish that they could even think that they could impact nature at all. How foolish if a man could think that in his smallness he could do anything that would make a difference to nature at all. So even if a man is wild-spirited, he can have no impact at all upon this universe. Then again, there are some men who are very grave or serious. Their view of the world is very solemn. They take everything so seriously and they are very highly strung. In the lives of such men, you will find that there is little or no joy and no happiness whatsoever. But to their great regret, they find that when they come to the end of their lives, such a view of life was futile, because even some people who are seriously handicapped, like people who are blind, can find great joy in their lives if they look at it with the right perspective. So what Dylan Thomas is trying to say is that at the end of their lives, it comes as a revelation, as a sudden flash to these grave and serious men, that they have lived their whole life for seriousness, for gravity, and they have lost out on the fun element. They could have enjoyed their lives, they could have been joyous and happy, but because their view of life was so grave, so serious, they have missed out on a lot. What is the outcome? They must die just the same as every other kind of person. The last quatrain is the most moving of all. In these few lines, Dylan Thomas implores his father to fight against death at all costs. He pleads with him to do something, bless him, curse him, anything, just so that he would know that he was not slipping into the silence of death. Both blessing and cursing imply an intensity that only the living can partake of. And so, whether Dylan Thomas's father blesses him or curses him, either would be taken by Thomas as a sign that his father was alive and well. And therefore he says, "Father, I pray, I plead with you, bless me, curse me, do anything, but let me know for sure that you are indeed alive." Now, Dylan Thomas's father was an atheist, and so with respect to his father, he uses no religious imagery whatsoever, which would have been the normal thing to do in such a poem, because religious imagery can often be a source of comfort to somebody who's stressed out and going through the turmoil of a near-death experience. But Dylan Thomas does none of that, just out of respect to his father's atheistic doctrine. In this poem, "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Night," there is a sense of the natural world being a spiritual force which is far greater than the individual's will. And this spiritual force is the one that Dylan Thomas addresses throughout this poem. It is said that at the time of writing this poem, Dylan Thomas was facing more than one crisis in his life. Not only was his father on his deathbed facing an imminent death, but even Dylan Thomas was not sure about the length of his own life. As Caitlin, his wife, wrote in her memoirs, a deep sense of foreboding had accompanied Dylan Thomas right from his teenage years. When he was a teenager, he had been to the doctor with a sickness, and the doctor had pronounced at that time that Dylan would not live very long. So this foreboding accompanied him and was at the back of his mind throughout his life. Also, DJ, as Dylan Thomas's father was known, would constantly say of his son that he would not live past the age of 40. Now, you might think that's a terrible thing for a father to say, but think about it even from the point of view of his father. Now, this dad would have watched from the sidelines as his young son was getting more and more involved in alcoholism, and it would have really troubled his heart to see him on a downward spiral. So I'm sure when Dylan Thomas's father expressed this fear, it was really coming from his own wish, his own desire that Dylan would give up his habit of drinking. But on the other hand, if you look at it from the point of view of Dylan Thomas, then it must have caused him great grief and pain to hear his father pronounce almost a death sentence upon him, saying that he would not live past the age of 40. I'm guessing that this is the curse which Dylan Thomas refers to in line 17 of the poem when he says, "Father, either bless me or curse me." He must have gotten so used to hearing his father speak these words that now when his father was approaching death, it didn't matter any longer. He was saying to his father, "Say something. I'm used to you saying the negative thing about my life not going beyond 40. So say it. It doesn't matter. This or that. Bless me or curse me. Either way, just let me know that you are alive." Critics and psychologists tell us that speaking about situations that have been extremely painful can have what is called a cathartic effect. That is, It releases the pain and we are purified from it once and for all. Perhaps Thomas mentions his father's ominous words to him that he will not live beyond the age of 40 just to achieve such a catharsis in his own life. The poem ends on an ominous note, and it leaves us with a heaviness in our hearts. We know that even though Dylan Thomas has been urging his father again and again to stave off death, to fight it with all the energy that's left in his aging and frail body, there is a sense of death that is going to come. And it is on this note that the poem ends, that in the face of the unrelenting laws of this universe, an individual's will means little or nothing. The power of this poem, Do Not Go Gentle Into This Night, lies in its straightforward approach to a universal theme, its simple structure, and its very simple rhyme scheme. In this poem, Thomas displays his skill as a scholarly poet, attempting to keep within the traditions that he had chosen to align himself with, while at the same time giving full expression to his emotionality. Thank you for being with me during this lesson, and I hope that you have understood it well and have also enjoyed yourself in the learning process.